get going and then. Welcome, friends. We're going to go ahead and get started, and this is our last number four in a series of four. Our last time with Calvin Mercer, talking about the history of fundamentalism, and I'm not going to waste your time because we always need every minute. So I'll let you get started. Thanks, Calvin.
Thank you, Amy. So, if you will permit me a commercial break here, I have two or three announcements. So first, this is the first public announcement of this actually, is this fall we have a new religion faculty member joining us in the religious studies program at ECU. Now, money doesn't usually flow to the liberal arts and the humanities these days. It flows to the business school and the medical side of campus. But we framed this to the administration as religion and health. And so this faculty member, Dr. Aaron Prophet, has a Master's of Public, MPA, Master's of Public Health. Is that an MPH? A Master's of Public Health, and also has worked in that area. And then she has a PhD in religion, and so she'll be working with the medical side of campus. Well, I won't go into all that, but that's one of her areas. Another area of her specialty scholarship is new religious movements, or what sometimes scholars call cults. And she has insight about this not only from her scholarship, but as an insider. And she grew up in what some at that time in America called a cult. This is the book that she wrote about this, Prophet's Daughter, My Life with Elizabeth Clark Prophet, Inside the Church Universal and Triumphant. So she has that background. And on the inside flap, it says in the early 1990s, in response to apocalyptic prophecies of her mother, Elizabeth Clare Prophet, Aaron Prophet, that's our new professor, entered a network of underground bunkers in Montana along with members of her mother's church, Universal and Triumphant, a controversial New Age sect much of America had branded a cult. Emerging to find the world intact, Aaron was forced into a radical reassessment of everything she knew or thought she knew about love, life, and obligations to church and family. So she comes with two backgrounds, religion and health, and religion and medicine, and new religious movements from an insider perspective. So we're real pleased to have her as our new colleague in religion, and I hope you get to know her in various formats as the years unfold. Another announcement is that we have a big annual lecture every year. We've had major scholars come to ECU, which is sort of unusual for a program as small as our religion program is. And this fall we have Andrew Newberg, who is probably the lead name in what's called neurotheology. So that's using brain scans to identify neural activity related to subjective reports of religious experience. So if you want to have a religious experience, do you have to sit in a monastery for 10 years and meditate, or could we just activate a particular part of your brain? So that's a fascinating area of study, and he's an expert on that. I do have a newsletter that we send out information about various things related to our program. You're welcome to just email me if you want to be on the newsletter. A couple people have asked me about the PowerPoint. You're welcome to this. Once I finish tonight, I'll be glad to email you the PowerPoint. And finally, I've said this briefly, but I just want to say again how much I appreciate Cedar Bridge Baptist for providing this platform. I've lived in this city for many decades, and I have an investment in this city in a number of ways. As you know, I was in city government. I loved this city, and I just so much appreciate I think Cedar Bridge Baptist provides a wonderful kind of opportunity in a city that I love. And so I appreciate Cedar Bridge Baptist. And I've said this also briefly, but the Cedar Bridge Baptist community is very fortunate to have Amy as the pastor. I've sat now under her, I would call it preaching/teaching, enough to know that she is extremely qualified in what we could call broadly the body of divinity, broadly understood, the history, the theology, scholarship, biblical studies. She is really excellent on all that, and she is so skilled at communicating that. That's why I call her preacher, teacher, and with a big pastor's heart. So young, growing church, very fortunate to have someone this skilled. And again, Scott in the back, Scott Anderson, keeping the tech part of this going. Thank you. Okay, so final topics, we'll get down the list as far as we can. We'll certainly get, I think, through miracles. So last time we didn't get to doubting one's faith, and so there is research out there about doubting, and it seems that highly authoritarian people, which would include Christian conservatives, fundamentalists, have significant doubt, significant percentage of those have doubts about their faith. And this is very small research at this point. It would be interesting to expand that. And also, the indicators are that youth doubt their faith, and few of them talk about it. And there's a couple of references there if you want to pursue that. So youth who doubt their faith, they can yell at God, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but as long as it doesn't stay at that level, it gets processed or resolved in some way. Ignore the doubt, that's probably not a good thing. And doubt, when it's not processed and resolved, creates more doubt and not only kind of internal discomfort and distress, but also perhaps dysfunctional behavior. So I think it's important for youth doubting to be addressed, and addressed in a healthy way. So doubts about faith among youth arise usually in junior high. There can be intellectual doubts about doctrine, about whether God exists and that sort of thing. But apparently, usually it is the doubting, while it may present as a doctrinal issue, emerges out of some sort of personal crisis. And, when life is not going right, why is this happening to me? Why is God not taking care of me? That sort of thing. And youth who address their doubts or are helped to address their doubts by youth leaders or competent adults in this area later report, when they look back, that it was very beneficial for them to be able to verbalize their doubt and to talk about it and to process it. So not a lot of research on this, but enough to give us some suggestions. Andrew Zersky, Susan and I were in a program with him some years ago, and so just very, very briefly, Susan was youth leader for many years, and one of the things that we did, we would have students sit in a circle. They would write down questions that they had, anonymous. They did not attach their name to it. They would fold up the piece of paper, put it in a pot, and then we would draw them out one by one, and we would have a conversation about that. And it was a group conversation. Everybody weighed in, but of course, Susan and I, as the leaders, we would draw things together and make coaching suggestions and so on. But it was an opportunity for students to ask anything that they wanted to ask. in a safe space. They asked sometimes questions about God, doctrinal questions, skeptical kinds of questions. They were always questions about sexuality, gay issues, and so on. And it was very, very useful, we think. I think we called it What's on Your Mind or something like that. And when Susan would ask the students what they wanted to do next year and creating the program, she always wanted to get buy-in from the students. They always said, well, we want this on the What's on Your Mind. We want that, right? So that's just one way to, sympathetically and effectively work with doubt, but I pass that along for what it's worth. So I want all this to be, positive, and I've banged this apart here. Let's see. So I want to kind of just briefly run through some points about dialogue and cooperation between the different sides of the liberal fundamentalist spectrum. I won't take a lot of time on this because I think most of it is sort of, common sense in the way we usually use that term. So let's talk about maybe the most extreme left wing cooperating or dialoguing with the most extreme right wing on religion, fundamentalism. So on Bible and theology, it is unlikely for there to be a lot of compromise or dialogue that ends up bringing people together, in my opinion. Fundamentalists have an absolutist kind of psychology, right? We talked about this. And so I think that's unlikely. Now, I have conversations as often as I can with fundamentalists because I just want to have those conversations. But I don't go into it that there's going to be a lot of compromise. I don't expect that. Dialogue, compromise on science, I think that's unlikely too, unless the scientific thing that you're talking about has nothing to do with or does not appear to contradict the Bible on the part of the fundamentalists. So, for example, if you're going to have a conversation about evolution, then science is not going to be a part of the data set that fundamentalists are going to consider. If you're talking about medical science, yeah, maybe so, as long as it doesn't contradict the Bible, yeah.
So this is where I have a big problem between science and religion.
Yeah.
As an example, I know somebody whose son went to college and majored in biology, but didn't, because of their religion, doesn't believe in evolution. And he's going to teach biology. And that really upsets me. I don't care where. Because evolution is so fundamental to biology at this point in time that really bothers me.
Yeah, well, I hear you. And it points to, a debate and a controversy, a topic that is right at the heart of public education, is, what's the curriculum, and so, and that's a good question. So, and that's a good question because if it is a private school, there may be more control over, what's taught in terms of this particular issue of creationism versus evolution. And so a public school might be, different. But I agree with you. I mean, it's concerning. And I think that I'm a person of science, and so I I am concerned too when science is discarded in the face of, in favor of ideology. Yeah.
Say he teaches 8th graders and he skips over that chapter on Darwinism and doesn't want to teach that, then he would have every single, at least 3 classes at some of our middle schools, sometimes 4, that would fail all the questions on evolution on their EOG as the standardized tests are written right now. If he is in, and I can only answer or kind of suggest this, if he's in a fundamentalist Christian school, they have total control over their textbooks and how they're testing. And they don't, to my knowledge, participate, and I could be wrong, in standardized testings for the state levels or get some control over how that's tested. So it would be interesting to know where he's going to go teach.
However, we have, I think, the influence of the right religion now in public schools. And that is, I think, another, how long, Texas, I think, for instance, is a good example of public schools and controlling what goes into their textbooks. And anyway.
Yeah, so there's a lot at stake, the quality of our education, the quality of graduates, the quality of the research that happens in after people graduate and move into industry. There's a lot at stake, and it's worth knowing about, and it's worth weighing in on in terms of politics is next, right? Dialogue, compromise on politics. That's just a tough one because we're in such a hard place in our country right now in terms of discussing politics. And so when you add religion in there, I think it's probably unlikely we're going to get much dialogue and cooperation. However, there's good news. Dialogue and cooperation on common, non-religious, at least in a strict sense of that word, projects is very possible and occurs in our city, occurs all the time, liberals, fundamentalists working on food pantries and homeless ministries and so on. And that happens, and we should celebrate that, we should engage that, and do as much as possible because the other 3 are not much, not a lot of hope there, right? And that opens the door to cooperate on projects, to be, feeding taking care of the poor or whatever with your fundamentalist friend. They might, and your liberal friend, they may have a different theology, a different psychology, but they're holding hands to do something good that they both view as a part of their spiritual commitment. And that's good. We should do it. We should celebrate it. And it may very well open the door. I would say when those 2 people, when they work all day down at the food pantry together, and then they go out, for Coke or something, and they probably are not going to get as mad at each other if they start moving into some of these other things. So I encourage that very much. Now, remember, fundamentalism is on the extreme right wing. Evangelical is not extreme right, okay? It's conservative. So liberal, evangelical, dialogue, compromise on Bible and theology, it's possible. Certainly to have conversation about that. So George Eldon Ladd is a good example. The Bible is the Word of God and the words of men. And so that opens up the possibility of critical study of the Bible, understanding the language, and so on. At the American Academy of Religion, which is the major professional society for religion scholars and teachers, 10,000 people get together at one place every year, if you can imagine that, all teach religion. There are evangelicals there from evangelical schools. They participate in the scholarly presentation and discussion of papers. They have a conservative theology. They have a conservative psychology, I'm sure, but they are flexible enough to have conversation. There's not always a lot of change of views, but there is space for healthy debates between liberals and evangelicals. Compromise on science, that's difficult, but that's still very possible. I just wanted to mention Francis Collins, who tried to get to ECU to speak, failed on that one. but he is a physician, geneticist, leader of the Human Genome Project, and director of the National Institutes of Health. I think he still is, maybe retired. I think he retired recently. And he is an evangelical with a very high view of the Bible, and he believes in evolution. Okay, so dialogue on science is difficult, but it is very, very possible with evangelicals. Okay, let's move to the next topic. Something else that liberals and conservatives disagree on, and that's the question of, is Jesus the only way? We call that exclusivism, is the notion that Jesus is the only way, and conservatives will be quick to quote you plenty of proof texts. Remember, we talked about proof texts and what that is. So there's one up there that you'll get quoted very quickly. I'm the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but through me. So the conservative exclusivism view is pretty easy to explain and present. So here is one way that progressives or liberals might think about this in a inclusive way, okay? And the context matters. Remember that we said earlier in the very first session, I think, that liberals are revisionist, right? They're willing to take old truths and update them and revise them according to changing situations. Of course, the danger is you don't want to lose your core values, right? So that's the challenge to liberals, is that you're throwing away the baby with the bathwater, but they are revisionist, right? Of course, they would say that they're not losing the baby. We're keeping the core. Fundamentalists are traditionalists. We want to do it the way it's always been done, right? So what's new? Well, what's new in the modern world is globalization. Post-World War II, we had veterans coming back who had been all around the world and saw all kinds of different cultures and religions. And in our city right here, we have all the major religions of the world represented, in part because of the medical school and the professional schools. Lots of people come from different cultures and different religions. And so this is a situation that you didn't have 500 years ago. So the liberals, of course, take this revisionist approach. Well, what does this mean? What's the context? So here is just one way. There's others. There's actually a whole kind of subfield of theology has grown up around this whole issue of Christianity and other religions and the different views, and it can get very complicated and nuanced. So this is just one way to let you see how to think about this. So I'm quoting scripture here, which fundamentalists like. John 1:1 says that in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and of course the Greek there is logos. So in a sense, John is saying that God is eternal, no beginning and no ending, and that's what he means by logos. And then the logos got fleshed out, got incarnated. Now, incarnation is a key doctrine so I'm almost saying this as if I were talking to a conservative, right? And evangelicals get them to buy in. We're not talking about an obscure doctrine here. Incarnation, that God incarnated in Christ, is a key Christian doctrine. And so this eternal logos got fleshed out in a particular time and a particular place. The first century Palestine, and Jesus was a first century Palestinian Jew. I mean, he ate food that they ate first century. He has transportation, was like a first century Jew. He spoke Aramaic, that was the spoken language. When things got written down, it could get written down in Greek All right, so Jesus, God, what sense would it have made if God had incarnated in the first century Palestine as a woman who spoke Chinese? That wouldn't make any sense, right? Because no one would listen to a woman in the first century, and no one spoke Chinese. And you can probably see where this is going, right? So the question, what would the incarnation look like in medieval Japan during the Shogun period? Well, it wouldn't be someone speaking Aramaic. It wouldn't be a Jewish man, right? It would be Japanese. And if there were text written that became sacred, it would be, in Japanese, right? Makes sense. I mean, we could go on and on and on, right? What would it look like in Maya, Mexico? All right? And just to take it far out, we got rocket ships going up all the time now. We are exploring near space, not the far reaches. But it's got people thinking about the question of extraterrestrial intelligent life and exploring space. And so what would the incarnation look like on the far side of the universe if there happens to be extraterrestrial intelligent sentient life there, right? It's not going to be a male Jewish person speaking Aramaic, okay? So that would be a progressive way of saying, pulling upon a very central, and pulling upon it in a conservative way, a very central Christian doctrine of incarnation, and saying, what that means is that God meets us wherever we are and shows up in ways that we can relate to. And so that can happen in other religions. Obviously, that's the conclusion of this kind of thinking through. Okay, does that make sense? I'm going to skip that slide. Okay, well, what about miracles? This is something else that historically liberals and conservatives have fought over. So liberals is that God works through natural means. They believe in God, but they believe that God uses the hands of medicine and in the miracle in the sense of a wonder, a conservative supernatural intervention by God that contradicts the laws of nature. Well, let's go a little bit deeper. So when we say miracles, Bible miracles, we're talking about what you find is that the miracle stories sort of pop up around key moments in the history of the people of God moving through time and space. The Exodus Sinai, for example, was the birth of these people, their birth story in a sense, and so there's miracle stories that surround that. With Jesus, the miracle stories are exorcising demons, curing the sick, resuscitating the dead, the really sick, and controlling nature. And so there are miracle stories that pop up in the Gospels around of those four categories. I want to make a note that being a miracle worker was not really that as unusual in that day as it is now. We have examples of miracle workers. Jesus had the reputation of being a miracle worker. There were other miracle workers. So I want to just walk you through just some considerations. Just consider some things that will help you, that will kind of make clear the liberal, I could even say scholarly approach to miracle stories in the Bible. So one thing is to think about the concept of miracle in terms of definition. If you walk up and down the streets of Greenville, and you interview people, what is a miracle? What is a miracle? You're going to get something like this, that a miracle is some event that contradicts the laws of nature. And if they're a religious person, then they're probably going to say it's some event that God does that contradicts the laws of nature. That's generally what we think of as a miracle. But now think about this. A miracle, defined as an event that contradicts the laws of nature, presupposes a universe that operates regularly and consistently according to certain laws. In other words, you can't have a miracle that contradicts the laws of nature if you don't have laws of nature. Okay? Now, the laws of nature that we take for granted, that are taught if you teach science in public schools that kids learn all the way through, those laws of nature were really kind of crystallized and refined and kind of understood and experimented on in the scientific revolution centuries after the first century, centuries after the time of the Bible. So our understanding of the natural world and how it operates, and the planets move around the sun and so on, all of that occurred centuries after the Bible. The apple fell on Newton's head, and the law of universal gravitation didn't happen quite that simple, but that happens, that understanding occurred centuries after the Bible. And so the notion of a universe that operates regularly and consistently according to certain laws was a foreign concept to the ancient Hebrew mind, which saw God acting directly and consistently in history, in their lives. That was their understanding. So nature is not a closed system. I love the quote by Gilbert Chesterton that talking about the sun coming up. Of course, that's coming up. We know it doesn't move across the sky. But he said, why does the sun come up and move across the sky? In the ancient world, their answer is because God said, get up and do it again, right? So anything that they didn't understand through their primitive science back then was attributed to some supernatural power. If it's a good thing, it's a good God, and if it's a bad thing, it's a bad God, right? And so the whole notion of miracle kind of has a different context for understanding in the ancient world than it has in our modern world, where we live in a scientific world, and miracle is a contradiction of laws of the universe that they didn't understand in that same way. What was something else on there? What? Oh, yeah. This is Thomas Jefferson would agree with what I just said about with what I'm saying about miracles, and you want to buy the Jefferson Bible if you have never seen, where he cuts out all the miracles. Anyway, so my great-great-grandfather, so after this session tonight, so I'm going to go home, and I'm going to sit in my chair, and I'm going to pick up the remote and push a button, and the television is going to come on, and I'm going to, watch. Now, I'm not, when I click the button and it comes on, I'm not going to say, wow, look at that. I'm not going to do that. I don't understand how it works. I don't understand all the circuits and the electricity and all that. I don't understand, but I know there's someone down the street who knows how it works if I need it to be fixed. It's not a miracle to me that contradicts the laws of the universe, all right? It's a very normal, natural event to push the button and the TV comes on. But let's say you took that television screen and put it in front of my great-great-grandfather, I think it was great-great-grandfather, who fought in the Civil War. So let's say it's the night before Gettysburg, and they're sitting around the campfire, put the screen out there, and you put the remote here, you click it, and the screen lights up. So what's my great-great-grandfather going to say? He's going to say, miracle, right? Or demon, I don't know. But right? It's a miracle. It's a miracle. So the context is very different from my going home and clicking the remote and my great-great-grandfather in this hypothetical story clicking the remote. Do you see? So for him, it's a miracle, a contradiction of the laws of the universe. So an obstetrician delivers babies. How many, I don't know, how many babies does an obstetrician deliver a week? What's a good week for, I don't know, 20? I don't know. Who knows? Like 30, 10? Okay, so let's say an obstetrician delivers, we'll just pick a number because I don't know, 15 babies a week, okay? Now, let's say you go to that obstetrician and you say, tell me about baby number 8. Oh, yeah, baby number 8, let's see, that was, let's see, the pulse was blah, 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 the blood pressure, the dilation, and the da-da-da. Right, you get a medical, scientific description of the birth of baby number 8. Got it? It's a perfectly natural event. For an obstetrician, it's just like another day's work. Now, let's say you go to the mother of baby number 8 and the father of baby number 8. You say, tell me about the birth. Are you going to get a cold, analytical description of it? Oh, no. Oh, you would not. Oh, it's just. And let's say it's a person of faith, okay? It's a miracle from God, right? Now, it's the same event, but it gets interpreted very, very differently, depending upon one's point of view and one's personal engagement in the event, okay? So, and the people of God, the ancient Israelites and the early Christians, were very engaged in their journey. Okay. So this is Gautama, the Buddha, and this is a picture of his enlightenment. And what happened is that at Bodh Gaya, this wonderful place in India, when the Buddha, when the Gautama was enlightened, sensuous dancers appeared as the evil ones trying to tempt him, and that didn't work, so they turned into demons of death because they knew, to get him to clutch to life, and which is contrary to Buddhist doctrine. And then he was assaulted with missiles, wind and rain, and uprooted trees and fiery rocks, and it just went on, and think the temptation of Jesus he's going through. So we have a similar story in the Gospels. The deadly missiles, this is so wonderful, as they would approach his head and almost blow his head off, then they would enter his consciousness and turn into lotus flowers, lotus plants. And so these are miracle stories from Buddhism. So what are you going to do with that? Right? Well, what scholars do is they interpret the miracle stories in the Bible with the same methods that they're going to interpret the miracle stories in Buddhism or Hinduism or any other religion. They're not going to have a different position on the miracle stories in the Bible because they're Christians, because that would be propaganda. It wouldn't be scholarship, okay? So they're gonna bring the same method and criteria of evaluation to the miracle stories in the Buddhism as they do the miracle stories in Christianity, Judaism. So to pull some of this together, so scholars who are addressing the Bible, there's some event, right? Jesus says something or does something, And then there's a period of the retelling. We don't really get this. We've lost this oral tradition today because of all of our technology. But oral tradition was very much a part of ancient cultures. And so that the story of that event or that saying gets told and retold. Christianity was we can talk about why in another context, but it was a missionary religion. It was expanding rapidly. And so there was a demand for stories about the Christ event, right? And so it got told and retold a lot, very fast, all around the world. And then eventually, these stories, whether it be the Exodus Sinai event or the Christ event, gets written down in a book. And the oral period can be decades with the Gospels, or it can be centuries with some of the Old Testament stories. And in the telling and the retelling, the story gets embellished and elaborated upon. So that's basically how scholars interpret miracle stories in Buddhism and in the Bible. Now, does this mean that if you identify as a liberal Christian or moderate Christian, you can't believe in miracles as contradicting the laws of the universe? No, that's fine. I mean, you can put your faith doctrine together however you want to. What I would just say is that I would caution about proving God or proving anything about the Bible based on miracles. In other words, if you go down the path of, I can historically and scientifically prove this miracle happened through archaeological findings or whatever, that seems to me to be a very dangerous path to walk down. Because if you really say that, okay, I can prove this miracle, right? And there are fundamentalists who try to do this, apologists. Then what if next month something is dug out of the ground, some new text or some new finding to show that it is now historically didn't happen? Do you see? Now where does your faith go? Do you see? So I would encourage you not to, I encourage fundamentalists not to base their faith on historical and scientific proof of anything in the Bible, but they do it all the time. Okay, but you see the danger of that, I think. Okay. I'm going to do this rather quickly. A lot of it is just sort of for people like you who are thoughtful, sensitive people. Look, so if you're going to talking to a fundamentalist, if you're a progressive, empathy and respect, we need that. You meet your conversation partner wherever they are. I don't care if you're talking about religion or politics or whatever. You want to be a good listener. You want to meet them where they are, have a willingness to learn. And look, we need to be careful about our language when we're talking to people in what might be a sensitive conversation. So the Bible has eras, I mean, I'm not sure that gets you anywhere, right? How about, have you considered that what the Bible really is intended to do is to give us guidance on how to be a good Christian, a better Christian in faith and practice, and that it's not really a history book like we have in school. You see how the language is different, but you're saying the same thing. But that's quite a critique there, because I really do think that viewing the Bible as a history book is misreading it. You actually, I don't want to get too deep on this, but you actually are imposing a modern secularist framework on a religious book, right? You're actually being a very modernist in the terms of making the Bible fit a modern conception of a history book, right? So here's, I think, is maybe the best question. I mean, I've just had so much juice out of this one with conversations with fundamentalists. It's just such an interesting question. What is your faith based on? It's a good question for all of us. And here's a more precise way of asking that question is, what is the irreducible minimum requirement to be a Christian? right? Not asking the irreducible man to be a good Christian, but just to be a Christian. And, you know, an old fundamentalist like me, I'm going to pull out Paul, and I'm a big fan of Paul. A lot of people don't like him. I know he's too arrogant for some, and what he's, you know, says about women and all this. So Paul's got some challenges, but I like Paul, and my reading is salvation equals grace plus faith, and that's it, zero, nothing else. And fundamentalists who hold the Bible up, and certainly Paul, you know, grace plus faith plus what else? Do you see? So I think that to really have that conversation is interesting with the fundamentalists. What is your faith based on? And, well, grace plus faith, if you sort of get to that point, then if they do agree with that Pauline formula, then it seems like the table is set for you to sit at the table with them and discuss everything else. And you can do it as brothers in Christ and sisters in Christ, you see. You can have a friendly conversation about abortion and about miracles and about this and that and the other, and you can disagree. And they may say, well, you're not a good Christian, but at least, you know, you're in the universal church with me. Do you see what I'm saying? So that's an interesting question. And here's a few more that we won't take a lot of time with, but literal versus symbolic. So really cut your eye out because it causes you to sin. So once you open up the possibility of symbols in the Bible, which I think is fairly easy to do if you look at something obvious like the first example I gave, then it opens up the possibility, well, are there other places where there might be the appropriate way to interpret the text might be symbolic, and that maybe open up a more flexible interpretation. Here's one that we touched on earlier is in the Bible there's a lot of practices and teachings. Which ones are forever and which ones are conditioned by the culture? I think I gave you this one earlier, that in the same passage it affirms slavery and the subordination of women. But fundamentalists will take the subordination of women, but I don't know, most fundamentalists don't advocate slavery, not like we used to have in this country. And so once you open up that question, you see, oh, okay, yeah, I see there is a difference here between something that's cultural addition and eternal truth. Well, then the table's open, it seems to me, for a discussion. Okay, where does this fit? Where does that fit? Right? So, I mean, you can go a lot of places with this. Family values. I mean, fundamentalists are, family values of the Bible. Well, I mean, all the great heroes of the Old Testament were polygamists, and then Abraham couldn't have a kid, and so he hooked up with his servant to have a kid, and Jacob fathered children from 4 women. So the whole notion of the traditional family is sort of imported and imposed on the text. I mean, Jesus, was single, as far as we know. I mean, the view in the Old Testament was marriage is a union between one man and as many women as he can afford. That's basically what marriage was in the Old Testament. Rich men had lots of more women because they could afford them. Okay, so anyway, the point here is that once you make that distinction, which I think is someone who's willing to talk to you and discuss and dialogue, you can see where that goes. I love the models. Job boldly just almost demands from God an explanation for what happened to him, and Jeremiah calls God a liar. I mean, just outright, flat out calls him a liar. Didn't put the verses up there, and Ecclesiastes is this wonderful, great Old Testament book, sort of an existential question about the meaning of life. So, good luck. Communication is a wonderful thing, ... when it happens. Okay, so it is 7:23. I'm going to skip this and just turn it over to, yeah.
Great,
sure.
folks, do you have questions or comments? We want you to use the mic so that the live stream can pick it up.
So I used to work for another church by extension, and I sat with a fundamentalist pastor of a very extreme church here in Greenville. And he was telling me how he'd taken the whole pastoral ministry with him to Greece to learn all about human trafficking. And he was so passionate and so strong about how they were going to, it must be LGBTQ community's fault that we have trafficking. It was a very strong piece. And my first question to him was, we're sitting in, Great Harvest Bread Company on Evans Street. I said, you went all the way to Greece when we have human trafficking right here? Like, why'd you go all the way there? Like, you want to go retrace steps of an apostle and discuss these things that you've seen in the Bible, but we have human trafficking right here in North Carolina, right? Why'd you go there? I can take you right across the street in the hood, and we can talk about the risk factors of who would be likely to step into something they can't get out of. And he said, but don't you understand? Like, we have to take a stand. We have to take a stand. We have to do these things. We have to stop. And what determines this, and his rationalization was that LGBTQ members were using children in Greece, and they were going to use children here. And I said, okay, well, back up, because not every, and this is a church I went to for 26 years, off and on. And I said, are you sure? Because everybody I know in my inner circle that are LGBTQ friendly, affirming, dated women, I've dated a woman, let's talk about this. Not once have I ever considered something like that. Are you sure those are the same buckets we want to put people in? And he said, well, what about where you work? Are they taking a stand? Are they going to start? And this is before the church had pulled from the United Methodist congregation. They were really ready to make strong changes that LGBTQ members would not be serving in their church and would not be getting married by anybody that they're affiliated with. And he he was very adamant, very passionate, very strong. Have to save the children. Have to save the children, and all this is bad. And I looked at him so closely, and I said, well, then that means you're attacking me too. That means you're attacking my friends. That means you're talking about other foster families and other people that have adopted children, and some of our doctors here, and heaven forbid, some of the people sitting right here in the same restaurant. Are you sure that's where you're really called? And he said, yes, why is it the church that you work for called to do that too? And I said, well, they're busy fighting, racial tensions and other things. We're not so worried about that over there. They're worried about making it home at night, And he said, they don't care. And I said, no, they have a different view of what should be a priority here, and they just haven't addressed that yet, and hopefully they will. And he said, well, I guess we can say you're serving in the way you feel that you should be called, and I'm serving in the way that I feel I should be called. And I walked away from the conversation feeling so defeated. Not because I ever thought it was going to go there. All I said was, hey, what's up? Blah, blah, blah. How are you? And it went to this extreme of where and I really had to sit with it for months, and I'm still processing it. But they've almost coached themselves into silos where I recognize that no one in his inner circle or somebody he'd attended that church with for 20-some years was saying, hey, have you thought about it this way? That can't be true. You're also attacking me. You're also attacking my sister. You're also, going after people and thinking because of this, they must be all evil and they're all damned to hell, and we must protect everybody from this. And so I will say, I don't know that I won the conversation, won his side or whatever, but I do know that if you don't say anything, if you don't give a little sprinkle of a seed, because I know he went home and talked to his wife about what we discussed, and she knows me too. And I know when I've run into her, it's probably in the back of her mind, hey, not everybody thinks like that. Because if they stay in the same rooms with people who only think the way that they think, and we never sprinkle those seeds in those conversations to say, hey, hang on a minute. Even if you don't win the conversation, there's some sort of snippet of, hey, when you're ready to look at this differently, hey, not everybody's in agreement with you. Because we tend to stay in our silos where it's comfortable too. And so I thought, God, why did you put me in that place? Why did I have that conversation? I feel gross, There's nothing great about this. I'm running from these people. But I have kind of come to the terms with the fact that you should cross over and have those little snippets of conversations. Even if you don't feel like you walk away from it with somebody's changing their mind or their thought, they need to know that not everybody is there, especially if you've known them from work or church where you've attended over a couple decades or even for 5 minutes. Because if you don't say something, it's almost like, if you join the military, if you've ever been a military spouse and everybody's so hyped up and they're so patriotic and they're ready to die for their country, these folks are ready to charge for their beliefs in a way that if you never hear anything differently, not that you're going to win the conversation, not that you're going to go show them all of Calvin Mercer's wonderful slides and say, no, I have proof, look at all these things, right? But if you don't challenge the way they think or drop a snippet that it's okay to think differently, even when you're from the same neighborhood, they will never hear anything else. So that's all I got.
Anybody have? Yeah.
I have a question just thinking about that. Like what I was thinking before you spoke, and it speaks to what I was thinking is it takes energy to do that. And so kudos to you for having the energy, because when I think about the people in my orbit with whom I would have these conversations, I look at it as I wake up with a finite amount of energy each day, and I used to want to put it in those buckets, and now I don't want to put it in those buckets, but then, that's not sprinkling the seeds. So I guess my question is, where do you find the energy?
Yeah, some people have more energy for that than others. Yeah.
I wasn't prepared for that.
Or a season in life where you have more energy for that, I think there are certainly times in my life where I've got the bandwidth to have that kind of conversation, and then other times where I'm just like, no, I can't do that right now,
Yeah, and I think the political context right now is not conducive. It's just harder than it has been in the past, and hopefully the future will get easier. But we're in a very tense, very difficult situation in terms of having conversations across the aisle like that about very different, deeply held beliefs.
But don't unfriend them on your social media. All they ever read is their silos, ultra-conservative, ready to fight for what they believe is right. And that one day they're scrolling and go, that's said this, she shared this. I haven't seen that. They may not agree with you, they may argue with you on Facebook, you don't have to respond. But I will say, I have had people come back over the years and ask more questions, or even my own mom, like, okay, tell me what this means.
And it may not be trafficking, but there are, I just want to again underscore, there's tons of good things being done where people from different ideologies get motivation from their ideology to do the same good work in the world. And that happens in our city across denominational and theological lines all the time. And that's good. That's good.
Other questions, comments?
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Calvin. We have really enjoyed it. It's been wonderful.
I still have handouts. I think everyone's been here in the past, but there's still handouts here.